I did my capstone research project over a cross-cultural study of parenting styles and the impact on adolescent behavior. This was a topic of interest to me because I've been lucky to be raised around many diverse groups, and seeing how different parents treat their children has just really had an impact on my life, and I was really curious about it. So, adolescence is defined as a period of rapid neural development and biological changes wherein there must be a renegotiation between parents and the adolescent. During this time, adolescents tend to value their own autonomy and personal choice, whereas the parents value safety and conformity to social conventions. According to an article published by Yale University in 2021, adolescence is a human universal that typically starts with the onset of puberty, is relatively brief, and usually ends with marriage. During this stage, more time is spent with peers as opposed to parents, and it leads to possible negative influences, as well as internalized feelings of self-worthlessness, leading the rate of suicide in adolescent populations to have tripled over the past 10 years. However, an adolescent's home background plays a significant role in activities and behaviors. Research in human growth and development shows that there are four main parenting styles: authoritative, authoritarian, uninvolved, and permissive indulgent. I'm interested in the cultural application of these parenting styles, as well as the impact that each style has on the adolescent. Authoritative parenting is characterized by high standards for the children and a clear communication about the parents' expectations, but also the parents demonstrate a high level of love and support. Authoritarian parenting is enforcing rules without nurturing the child. Permissive parents do not attempt to control or regulate their children's behavior. They avoid putting any boundaries in place and may show high levels of warmth and support. Meanwhile, uninvolved parents lack responsiveness to their children's needs and often disregard them entirely. As I said earlier, I'm interested in the cultural application of these parenting styles. I'll be analyzing Anglo-American, African-American, Latin American, Indian, Southeast Asian, and Asian American households. Over the past 4 months, I've conducted extensive research into these cultures and their parenting styles. However, the generalizations of these following parenting styles are not indicative of what is experienced in individual households. In Anglo-American households, autonomy and independence are central ideas of America itself. These parents tend to allow their children to have relatively loose freedoms and independence while still placing strict rules and emphasizing financial success. Additionally, filial piety has decreased over the past 20 years to the point where now adolescents are less likely to respect an authority simply because they are an authority, and they have decreased their rate of respecting their parents simply because they should. Parental authoritarianism is less accepted because of this. The children don't see why their parents should have that much influence in their life. As a result, Anglo-American households tend to parent in an authoritative style. Financial success is a very stressed topic as opposed to Asian American households, which I'll talk about later, wherein academic success is the most stressed thing. In Anglo-American households, they stress your ability to go out, get a job, and make money. Anglo-American parents are also more likely to exhibit academic authoritativeness than other cultures, wherein if the child brings home a negative grade, they're met with a negative response, whereas if they bring home a positive grade, they're met with a positive reinforcement. Throughout American history, African-American society has been forced to change in order to fit what Anglo-American culture allows it to be. During the white flight to the suburbs, we saw a massive influx of African-Americans into inner cities, taking on the industrial positions that nobody else really wanted at the time. Because of this, our view of African-American society has been greatly shaped by being inner city. This being said, the systemic oppression of African Americans has actually led to higher self-esteem scores for African American students. Scholars believe that this is because African American families strive to instill self-esteem in youth and an attempt to cope with the discrimination that they face and emphasize their desirable distinctiveness. Authoritarian parenting practices in African American communities are seen as caring, loving, and respectful, as well as protective and beneficial. As low socioeconomic status of families of ethnic minorities are more likely to live in hazardous communities where the crime rate is higher, authoritarian parenting might not be as harmful as it was in other environments, and may even have some protective benefits. In Latin American households, I gathered a lot of research over this topic, and all of them came to a different conclusion. However, the one that was most widespread was that the 4 traditional parenting styles did not accurately capture Latin American families. Instead, one of the studies done by Rodriguez, Donovic, and Crowley characterized parents as protective, whereas others characterized them as authoritative. The protective parenting style was characterized by high warmth, high demandingness, and low autonomy granting. Additionally, Latin American parents tended to treat their daughters and sons drastically differently, where the sons were given more autonomy and were asked less of them, whereas the daughters were given less autonomy and asked more of. Additionally, because of the family and community importance that Hispanic culture stresses, Latin American students actually scored the lowest on self-esteem tests. Indian Southeast Asian households. According to Sharma and Pandy, there was a discouragement of autonomy, wherein fathers were less physically present and more physically distant, and tended to be more authoritarian, whereas moms were authoritative. There were no significant differences in the way that they parented their daughters versus their sons. They just tended to not give as much autonomy. Because of this absence of interparental consistency, it led to a higher rate of distress in the student, but had no significant impact on self-esteem. Asian American households. Lee Jung found that respect and obedience were traditional Confucianist values embodied in the concept of filial piety. So the parents' control in these societies was less resented because in that community, obedience was what was expected. According to Chow in 1996, mothers from Taiwan believed that their children should be trained from a young age to behave well and achieve high academic honors. In this society, authoritarianism tended to be the most popular parenting style, wherein children were asked a lot of and pushed towards academic success, but showed little to no warmth and support. All right, the impact on adolescent behavior. So authoritative parenting tended to be the most positively received. It increased competence and psychological well-being, as well as self-esteem and emotional regulation, while decreasing the internalization and externalization of problems, and lowering the rate of risky behaviors in adolescence. Authoritarian parenting tended to increase mental health problems, increase the adolescent internalization and externalization of problems, decrease self-esteem, and increase adolescent deviance, as adolescents were more likely to rebel and interact with deviant peers when prohibited it being a part of such relationships. Permissive indulgent parenting led to a greater susceptibility to deviant peers due to less monitoring, a greater rate of substance abuse, riskier sexual behaviors, but a higher self-esteem than those from authoritarian households. Uninvolved parenting tended to be the most harmful overall, wherein there was a greater rate of deviant behavior, a higher suicide rate, a greater rate of substance abuse, and riskier sexual behaviors. This is due to a lack of monitoring, communication, and education on safe sex practices and an extreme lack of warmth in the household. Areas to grow. While this whole study was over how the children experience parenting in their own households, there are things that we as a society can play a role in. The socioeconomic and sociocultural factors play a significant role in these families, but community centers have helped to keep inner city adolescents from getting involved in gang activity and substance abuse. Counseling has helped adolescents from authoritarian households heal, and communication has proved to limit the negative consequences of adolescent deviant behaviors. In summary, the authoritative style of parenting, showing a high level of warmth while maintaining a set of consistent rules and boundaries, is the least harmful parenting style and leads to healthy young adults ready to enter the workforce and society. These are my citations, and then next up. Thank you.
I was just curious, because I know at first when you were first starting this project, you had some difficulty gathering your data, not following your own, but from outside people. How'd you go about getting this data for your research now?
Yes. So whenever I first set out on my capstone, I was dead set on conducting a survey that I was going to send out to students and faculty at Weatherford College, and it was going to be a cross-cultural and cross-generational study of the parenting styles. However, with my proposal to the Institutional Review Board, it got shot down and I was not allowed to connect a survey of students. So I decided to go with a literature review instead and gathered my resources through the Weatherford College Library.
So what are the major differences between authoritative and authoritarian styles?
Authoritative was you have these very strong rules in place, but you also show a high level of warmth and support for the student, whereas in authoritarian households, that high demandingness was not met with any warmth.
Whenever you're discussing Latin American households, you sort of mentioned how the four main categories don't exactly fit those sort of households very well. Do you think there could be some sort of improvement in coming up with different categories for different types of parenting?
Definitely. So that one study by Rodriguez actually suggested an 8-frame parenting style group, wherein there was protective, and then the 4 main parenting styles were still in there, but then he also added the protective and then one that was like relatively uninvolved or something, and it was basically the uninvolved parenting style but with slightly more restrictions. And so there was a lot of studies that suggested we expand the parenting styles from the 4 main ones.
So what's interesting to me, well, there are lots of interesting things, but I'm wondering, you know, and I'm just thinking about like myself and my children, who gets to decide if warmth is there? You know, because it's difficult to like measure, right?
Yes.
Like, so how do people attempt to quantify warmth and support?
That was a thing, again, the study conducted by Rodriguez found that prior studies with Latin American families had been more of a survey-based and had not gathered the correct like grouping of information. So they did it through observation, and they invited the parents and children into the room. They gave one like team building task, and then they asked one parent to leave the room, and then they proposed something that in the past had tended to cause conflict between the parent and the child. One of the examples was the child won't leave the parents alone whenever they're asking for like a quiet space to do work, and So things that had normally caused conflict, and the researchers observed with the child and the parent what the parent met that with. If they met it with a high demandingness and a strictness, or if they met it with a more gentle response.
Is there an accurate estimation for when adolescency starts?
Adolescence, it's more like when puberty starts. And then it usually ends when they get married.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Is there traits you can see within the kids because of this? Like,
Yes.
are they gonna start, say they're, uninvolved?
Yeah.
Say if it's uninvolved, you can see more traits of them repeating that too?
Like with their own children?
Like the children are gonna become uninvolved parents too?
Yeah.
Is that something you're gonna see a trend on? Or?
It was shown that with authoritative parenting, the children tended to go and parent their children more authoritatively as well. However, with all of the others, it tended to be the reverse of however they were parented. So children raised in authoritarian households tended to become more permissive and indulgent because they wanted to give their children the freedoms and experiences that they never had in their childhood.
I'm just curious, you were focusing on American parenting styles in different communities within American culture. Did you look at all at how American parenting styles compare to parenting styles in other parts of the world?
Yes, so most of the studies conducted were focused on these diverse communities inside America. The Indian Southeast Asian one actually was a survey of Indian and Southeast Asian families in India and Southeast Asia. However, there were no significant studies with the other communities in their natural places of origin.
Yeah, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to see
Yes.
if like Indian American parenting styles are the same as parenting styles in India,
Yes.
or if that changes with the movement to a different culture.
One of my studies over Latin American families actually it was a 3-generational study. And so one of them was the grandparents who had been born and raised in Latin America, but moved here later in life, versus the parents who had moved here in their teenage years, and then the children who had been born here. And so this 3-generational study did show a shift in Latin American parenting. It showed that basically the longer this child had been in America, the more likely they were to grant higher autonomy.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I have a kind of following up with what Dr. Smith was asking. This is one of the things that's just kind of been bouncing around in my head here is that, this is a study, most of the studies done in America for American psychology, sociology, that tends to conclude that white American ways of doing things are the best way to do things.
Yes.
And measures whether they are the best by how well they meet sort of white American values. Is that something you came across in sort of the evaluation of this? That have people looked at that side of like the assumptions that they bring to the table?
Definitely. So, if you look throughout the research, everything says that authoritative parenting is the best. That's what white Americans parent as. And so there was no surprise that that was what the scholars said was the best. However, as we saw in Asian American and African American households, authoritarian parenting does actually show certain benefits in certain communities. For instance, keeping Asian American students focused on schoolwork, authoritarian parenting in white children tended to show a decrease in academic achievement, whereas in Asian students it showed an increase in academics. And then in African American, authoritative parenting showed a higher risk of deviant behavior and gang involvement, whereas authoritarian parenting showed a decrease in those things.
Okay, because I was thinking that last page where you had, the top was authoritative, is like, here's all the good things, and then you just now basically said that, but in other communities, those good results don't necessarily come from authoritative.
Yes.
So, again, that seems kind of, there's assumptions going on in the research out there right
Yes.
now.
So it was hard to find negative results of authoritative parenting. Because in general, it led to a greater competency. But if you looked into specific, like, well, if this people group lives in this specific place, then maybe authoritative parenting isn't the best option.